I don't want to rotate the device. Why ain't it showing me? There we are. Now I can watch it and see what we got going on here.
Wow, look at this.
Are you kidding me?
94% of people believe company culture is important to an organization's.
There's nobody on here yet. What the hell? Stupid thing. I guess it's gonna have to be like that, huh? I have a choice. Stupid thing. I'm somebody. I'm having to run two phones here to see everybody's comments. I'm gonna have to adjust this camera again. Is it not buffering? How is the signal and the service going? Nope, it's not working. Well, that ain't good. Blurry picture. Well, that really sucks. So it's looking alright, because on my phone over here it keeps buffering the video, but the only reason for me to have this phone in my hand is so I can read everybody's comments. So we'd like to say hi to Hunter Gatherer, hi to my buddy Mo Rockin', Noah Carter Music, Mary Ellen Johnson, and your picture is fine. Well, hopefully I can get this to last a little while. I'm getting like started 45 minutes later, but I had some company this weekend. Mo Rockin'. Fixed. Strictly creaking. See, when I'm looking at my phone, it's running a little bit behind, but LNK, hello. See, it's not showing me how many people's actually watching, though. Go to the live chat, start it up again. So, I guess I should just go ahead and get started, because I'm going to save each one of these for later on. And I was supposed to have a punch list actually ready, but it's been a busy weekend. I had a good friend come up from West Plains, and he helped me redo my shower. And then I took him and my buddy Darren hunting today. Yeah, Hunter Gatherer, it's been pretty dry too. Hello, LNK. It's been real dry. So, anyways, if all these work right, I'm hoping I can make these disquisition videos about an hour long for each one, and I'm going to always keep adding to them on down the road. But all the information that I'm going to talk about and share is everything I've learned in 21 plus years of just, that's with the archaeology part. That's from reading every book accessible that I felt it was needed to read. I needed to have that information in there. But it goes with a lifetime of learning from always the best hunters to be a good hunter. It comes from always from decades of learning from all of the best survivalists. Anything that has to do with any kind of survival. And it's the same with foraging, because there's a lot of things that get skipped out. I'm not, a lot of archaeologists, some of them are good, a lot of them are bad. They do all kinds of crazy things. Hope that's not buffering, but I don't want to put anybody down. They have brought a lot of good information to the game, but they miss a ton of stuff. And there's just a lot of misconceptions when it comes to people in prehistoric life. Because, I can remember even just 20 years ago, people still used the term caveman, thought they were stupid, and, most of them died off and somebody else come along. I mean, we all die off, but cultures didn't die off. Cultures just evolved into somebody else, whether it took 100 years, 500 years, 5,000 years. Are we still doing okay here? Somebody give me a comment. So, I've done a lifetime of reading. Historical reading, just regular history, historical Native American. I read everything I could about that before I started getting into artifacts. Mary Ellen Johnson says you're okay. Amor Atkins says thumbs up. Okay. So out of a lifetime of reading about how to always be the best hunter, or learning to always try and be a better hunter, an extreme survivalist, always be a good forager, and then everything that falls in with archaeology, and all that does, it's even like weapon making falls into archaeology, flint knapping falls into it. There's so many aspects. A lot of the things, people always think they went without shoes. That's a terrible misconception. And it really never needs to fall into the discussion as to how long humans have been here, because that's a very controversial thing, not just on this continent, but on the planet as a whole. But no matter what, 10, 13,000 years ago, we were just ending the last ice age on this planet. Now, by science, the planet's been here 6 billion years. In 4.5 billion years, it's went through all kinds of changes. And some of those changes has been an ice age 5 different times. Each one lasting millions of years, then that ice age goes away and something else happens. Well, we just left the last ice age. For the infinity of time, 10,000 years to this planet is nothing. So, prehistoric people, mostly, except for in Africa and some other places, always lived in cold climates. Well, that would always give us frostbite on the feet, so they had to make footwear a long, long time ago. Who knows? That's whenever they first experienced cold weather and started, traveling far enough and getting to where there's cold environment, well, they were already probably making regular some type of clothing, so they automatically made footwear. Or people would get frost, that we'd be impervious to frostbite. I really should have had my punch list made up. So people have always thought that their cognitive thinking wasn't strong enough to like problem solve all the time. But that's what they were best at. It's just like there's a terrible misconception, and a lot of like mainstream archaeologists won't state it. There's been like one, I don't remember where I read it, but they had boats for a very, very long time, long before they came here. And a very good example is that is the Aborigines people. You know, they traveled from where they were on one side of the Pacific Ocean, and at that time, the waters were a lot lower because of the Ice Age. You know, when all that Ice Age happens, it sucks a bunch of water out of the ocean. So certain other parts of the world were exposed that aren't really exposed nowadays. And there's a big controversy as to whether the Aborigines people went to Australia 65,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago. But no matter what, they hopped from island to island to island until they had a short distance to the main continent of Australia. Well, to this day, for the last 300 of known recorded years that they've been recording it, those waters of the Pacific Ocean in between this part of Asia and, you know, like the other parts of that continent, you got Africa that borders right there, and a couple other those, but between that Pacific part of Pacific water, everything around Australia is heavily shark infested waters. Always has been. It's like the most shark infested water place in the world. Seymour Rockins comment there, yucca woven sandals found in Arnold Research Cave. Yeah, there's been a lot of shoes, you know, kind of discovered over the years, but nothing really old. So for those Aboriginal people, whether it was 50 or 65,000 years ago, to even island hop through those waters wouldn't have mattered if it was 500 yards or 5 miles. They would have had to went in some kind of boat, because by going in masses of people, whether it was 20 at a time, 10 at a time, or whatever, somebody would have always been getting attacked by a shark. There was a lot of sharks. So to even think that they swam, whatever it was, when I just don't believe that was actually what occurred. It's very probable that they had boats. Now, there's a video that's on YouTube, and it's a Navajo elder, okay? And he always explains, you know, like before they had literature or whatever, they didn't have no writings except petroglyphs and pictographs, you know, to record or tell stories or whatever. But telling stories is how they always kept through the thousands of years of people knowing what happened before them. And he speaks about how they came here on boats. But he's not talking about they came across the Atlantic Ocean, more they followed the outside of the Bering Strait and came along that way. Now, even in South America, I'm sure a lot of people have seen it. It was an underwater cave that was discovered that had all kinds of megafauna in it, had a 13,000-year-old girls and they carbon dated everything to like about 23,000 years. So that's far beyond what they want to classify as who was actually the first peoples to come to the American continent. So we got 11 people. And I really should have had my punch list. So, you know, there's just two bad misconceptions right there, that they weren't smart enough to make boats until they got to the woodland period or the Mississippian era. It's just boats are made out of organic, so there's never been any found older that I know of than like Mississippian era. I'm not saying that for around the world because I don't study a lot of archaeology from all over the world. But when it comes to prehistoric life, it wouldn't matter if it was on that continent, on the other side of the ocean, or on this continent, South American continent. To survive in prehistoric times, it was still always the same thing. It's just like, to survive, you need a good group of people. You need a substantial amount of people, whether that was 10, 20, 30. Not very many people survive alone, even to this day and age. Not saying that doesn't happen, because there is always an exception to everything. Always an exception to everything. And then who really knows what drawn them to this continent? We know at that same time, that's when the Younger Dryas layer happened. And all the megafauna in different places, they've excavated into the Younger Dryas layer a lot, are just full of nanomines. And those are space diamonds. It's space dust, you know, from an asteroid. But there was no crater created. Now, I can't remember the exact resource, but if anybody searches a lot of the stuff on Google, it's there. And it's there in books out of a library as well. There's some archaeologists that believe on the eastern part of Canada, there's a giant valley. And they believe that that valley at that time, like 13,000 years ago, was under 1.5 miles thick of the Titan ice sheet. That was at the end of the last ice age. Most of the Titan ice sheet that encompassed all of North America was anywhere from 1.5 miles tall to 2 miles thick. That's a lot of ice. So they believe that that's actually where the asteroid hit and caused that environmental change to drastically happen, not just here, but all around the world. It's going to affect the weather everywhere, but that's why it didn't leave like an asteroid crater like they have in Arizona, or like all the ones you can see on the moon, because the Titan ice sheet took a large part of that impact out of it. I can't say for certain that that's all 100% true, but some science is good, science is science. It's not perfect either. It is created by humans. No human is perfect. No human knows it all. I don't know it all. That's not why I do these videos. I do these videos because I have researched my butt on so many different things, but I have a good, impeccable memory to retain a lot of it. But of course, I was starting a little late, so I was a little nervous. I was nervous because I didn't have my punch list. So, for who knows how long, it definitely 200, 300,000 years, those prehistoric humans' cognitive thinking was just as advanced as ours is today. That's not going to change much, let alone only 30,000 years ago. The only thing that changed was somewhere down the line, the technology age came. Industrial technology and everything else, and modern conveniences is what's ruined humanity for the most part. Because you can take some of the people that call themselves an extreme survivalist. You put them on that show alone, and they start dropping like flies. You know, you couldn't have that in prehistoric life. Everything was about not just sustaining life, but being able to thrive. So that means you always have to be drinking plenty of good water. That means you always have to be eating good. That's not saying that they didn't have little periods where they experienced famine. But the best Paleolithic people, that's why they moved around. That's why they were so nomadic, because they knew to always have the best resources. You constantly sought out new resources, whether that be you chasing the same herd of mammoths for 1,000 miles. They're still going to come across new, different types of resources. Most likely they just ran into different herds. So the misconception that they were stupid and didn't have enough better but to live with just a little bit of thing covering them and live in a cave with no shoes is just absolutely ridiculous. Tim Shamblin, hello. We got 12 people. Man, that's not a lot, but I'm glad you guys are here. I really appreciate that. I really do. So, you know, the misconception of them not ever having footwear, that's just, it's not practical. Most things in living today where practicality really dictates what happens, it's the same thing back then, but where a lot of those mainstream archaeologists miss out is, as a kid, you know, I can't say for what they all did, but they went to school and they studied something out of a book. They learned from somebody else who nowadays, a lot of that older stuff is just considered older thinking. We've advanced from that. And there's been a giant plus to that part of social media, because I have learned so much from so many different people off of social media, the ones who are particularly teaching what they do know, versus a lot of them that show you something and they really don't even know that they're teaching you something. But if you're paying attention to details and you're always looking for what is to be, you're gonna learn something from everyone. So, this is where I should have had my punch list. I really should have had that. We know that, you know, up until the early archaic stages, you know, including the early archaic people, the Daltons and all the other early cultures, the Cody Complex culture, they were still all pretty nomadic. Though they wouldn't have been nomadic as true paleo people who would have went from, you know, across 3/4 of this country or halfway or what we consider 5 states. You know, to them there was no such thing, but they would have traveled distances like that pretty easily. The Clovis people, the Folsom people, Cumberlands are a little bit more regional. Clovis is really like found widespread. And then see, there's some western stem points that are actually been dated older than Clovis, but there's a lot of controversy over that. I don't care about people's controversies, I really don't. Like I said, any information that I'm going to share, it's from what I've learned from somebody else. It's not information I've made up. I have taken a lot of things and collaborated them. That's the type of person I am. It's what my mind does. I should start sharing a lot more different types of posts on the community posting, just like I did for the advertisement of this video coming out tonight, where I share a lot more things on there versus like I do on the other social media platform. Hope everybody had a good weekend. Tim, there's been several sites that they found that have been dated 18 one in Texas at 20. There's one up, like up in, I can't remember what part of Canada, but actually dated it 24,000 years old. The one down in South America with the little girl was 13 or was 23 or 24,000 years old. So, as you know, and that's another thing, like, that's where the population of the historic Native Americans came from. The First Nations people, whatever we want to call them, their population grew to be, like, I don't know, it may have been 20 million. That part's like guesstimated in a book as to when the pioneers and colonization started to come here. Well, it grew to that number because after that Younger Dryas event, however anybody wants to state it, happened, and of course if it happened like I spoke about, caused for, who knows, 500 years, 1,000 years, weather differences everywhere. That's a very good scenario as to why so many people left that other side of the world to come here, because they were experiencing drastic environmental differences over there that they thought were going to affect their long-term livelihood. And not just their long-term livelihood, but they're thinking their grandkids hundreds of years, generations beyond them. Because it's kind of like a gastropod, and it's like a lot of historical Native American elders have always taught what is known as like the circle of life. You have to be adding to that circle to constantly keep the motion going. Your bloodline, humanity, your people, whatever you want to call them. They speak about how everything works in a circle. The earth is round. Flowers take on an overall diameter, a round shape. And it's like a gastropod fossil or an ammonite. They're round. The circle of life petroglyph, I think that's where they come from, is them finding gastropods, and the circle of life is already something that goes on. So once those late paleo people came here, whether people want to believe they walked across the Bering Strait in the frozen ice land, or they came along the edge in boats, or they floated straight across the ocean to South America, or they came across the Atlantic current up against that part of the tight ice sheet, I really don't care what you want to believe in that part. They got here. That was the main thing. They did whatever it took to make sure they got here. Well, those Dalton people, those late archaic paleo or late paleo people, all they did through time was multiply, multiply, multiply. And then somewhere in there, something always causes them to change from being one type of a culture with one type of, a point type that we identify with that culture, like Dalton type points, They eventually all evolved into the early archaic people, whether they were making rice lobes as knives and agate basins as their projectile or hardened points, lost legs, it don't matter, dovetails, you can name all those early archaic points. All those people evolved and transitioned from those late paleo people. It's the same way all the way down the archaic timeline. The late archaic people transitioned into the woodland era people. Those people multiplied. That's where the Mississippian culture come from. When the Mississippian culture and all their great mound cities disbanded, that's where all the historical era Native Americans come from. I mean, that part's really just practical. That's pretty easy for anybody to figure out. Well, we got 13 on here so far. So, it's like when those archaic people started, well, I'm skipping something. I'm missing something because I should have my punch list, okay? Whether anywhere prehistoric people lived at in the world, they're always, well, if you're in that Arctic area, the water's below, freezing or whatever, but it's still running, it's so cold, it don't have bacteria. So you can just drink that water. But you get anywhere where the water and the terrain is warmer, and the water's above 38 degrees, whatever it is, all the time, it has bacteria in it. So humans learned a long time ago that always had to drink from spring. You had to drink from a spring, they didn't have medicine back then. Someone out in the wild nowadays trying to survive out in the middle of nowhere, drink some regular water and gets giardia or diphtheria, you're gonna die. That's it, you're just gonna die. And that kind of, so they always had to have spring water, which comes to another thing. They always had something that they could pack water in. It's just like the Aborigines people in Australia to this day. The ones who still live out like their ancestors did, they use a kangaroo scrotum as their water pouch from traveling from one spring area to the next spring area. Now, I'm sure a lot of those prehistoric people had other different parts. They could have possibly taken a stomach and removed everything out of the stomach from one small hole, washed that stomach out and cured it, done something in the process to still make it pliable and use it for a water container. Gourds, that certain areas probably had gourds. They probably traded gourd seeds. Gourds worked great. There's actually a real basket. That's a woven basket. I don't remember the fibers the plant was made from. And it's actually in a wooden cage where it was made to carry on their back. That was a water container. That is actually with historical nations, first Native American tribe. So they always had some kind of way to pack water. But it was the European white people that were boiling rocks when they were, to drink whatever they wanted to. Prehistoric, Paleolithic people didn't boil water. They always sought out freshwater springs. So when you get to those archaic people, more regional. That's why you have different forms of different types. Even though, we have points, a few points of ours here that look like, have similarities to a point found in Kentucky or Tennessee. And it's kind of like that, anywhere. All the points types change by their shape, whatever, whether they were a knife or a projectile. So that establishes where those archaic people are becoming more regional, but they're always still nomadic. So, and the reason for being that, in a region of their self, is because wherever your occupation site is, of course you don't want to use up all your available resources right there, because then there's nothing ever to replenish them. We know they made axes and celts for cutting down trees. A lot of people have done experimentations where they make one axe or a celt and they cut one or two trees down with it, or even three after resharpening it or something. That there actually explains more than probably what those people that did that video even understood. You can't burn green wood. Everybody knows that. Green wood just does not burn. And you need a good hot fire to cook your food on. When you're starting a fire with a stick, you want good wood. You want it to be kind of seasoned. You want it kind of dead. You don't want it super dead. Hey, Cabelli, I was just talking about the Aboriginals people, buddy. So, you have this fact that they always needed spring water, okay? You have the fact that they always had to have an occupation site to live on. They only want to live on that occupation site until one of their most conserved resources is starting to dwindle down for as far as they got to pack it from to have it at camp, which is always going to be firewood. Anybody goes out and lives in the wilderness now, if you have a group of people with you, eventually you're going to expend that firewood to a certain amount of distance. You're not going to want to carry it from a mile. Half a mile radius around an occupation site, I could probably see that. Though those occupation sites are always going to be at a spring. So we have these archaic people being more regional to areas. We know that they always have to have spring water to drink from. We know that firewood was, practicality dictates, their most conserved resource, okay? So we know they got to move to another occupation site. Well, and they know those, the people have been here for thousands of years before them, like let's say they're late archaic people. But you can really add it for any timeline when the Paleolithic people started to become regional. That's why certain point types are only found in certain regions. So what they're doing is they're still working the circle of life where they live at. They're going to stay on a single occupation site until that most conserved resource is used up, which is going to be their firewood. They're going to want to go to the next occupation site in a certain direction, but they're always going to travel in a circle. See, they could have had, you take the Atlee culture. You take one group in my region. They may have had 10 different sites they lived at for a certain period of time, or they may have had 30 different sites that they lived at. But they were all along some type of a waterway, whether it was a big river, a medium-sized creek, a little creek, and everywhere there's a spring. So when one is born at one camp, we'll just call him John. Okay, so John was born at this site, on the DH site. They're there 3 or 6 months. That part is always going to fall out of being able to actually dictate by what's practical, because that's always going to have so many variables depending on the size of your groups. It's how soon you're going to use up whatever certain resource before it's time to move on to the next site. So when they're living at one site and John is born and he gets to be, let's just say, 6 months old, okay? They've used up all their close firewood. And this site is like a site they've already returned to. Let's say that culture has been in existence for 500 years. So that site's already been used 15 different times through the years. And it's time to go to the next site. Well, there's another thing that falls in. They already know exactly what's a mile up the river. It's where the next spring is. where Bob over here lived there 15 years ago. That's where he was born at, or 5 years ago. I hope you're understanding that concept. So they only stayed at one for so long. It's time to move to the next one. But they're always going to send somebody ahead of them, because they're not going to show up where they lived at last time. Nobody's been there for, who knows, 15 years, 6 years, 5 years, but nobody's been there. That's long enough for whatever type of vegetation growth they had back then to grow up. They're going to send somebody to that site a month, 2 months beforehand to burn it off. They'll burn it off really good, so when they show up, they don't have all this tall vegetation, whatever type of grass it was that they have to deal with. That also falls into another thing. It's just like Navajo hogans is what a Navajo traditional home is. Those things have been made forever before the Paleolithic people come to this continent, which is just a timber structure made out of trees, and it's mud and vegetation packed to make your outside exterior. Most of all the fire pits, they're made in the floor. The chimney actually runs out the bottom of the floor. There's a small hole at the top, and that draws the fire right through. Now, we know they did this here in archaic periods. It's like the cucumber site. Before they started digging it, it had 2 huge longhouses. They were big, and they were collapsed in, been laying like that for 3,000 years. But when you dug up to the edge of that, and you're digging down to that clay pan, and that's where you're stopping, and all of a sudden you get to this line where that clay pan disappears and your black dirt drops another foot. Even though they made, their exterior out of clay and vegetation, because of all the vegetation, because of all the timber, it all became organic matter, and over the eons, over the thousands of years, it turned that clay to be more of a black material. And that's why when you dig into a house, it drops down into the clay layer that never got a bunch of the organic matter mixed into it. All of those houses any of us have ever dug into, they always have in an area where there's a bunch of sandstone. But because they're in the dirt now, and all that water has always, the moisture from winter, snow melts, whatever, all that fire rock that they use for a sandstone, when you excavate it out, it is white encrusted. Okay? You can dig on the same site, and you will dig up pitted anvils, you'll dig up square little grinders. That's what all their platform grinders were, to grind anything that needed to be grinded with an abrasive material was a flat piece of sandstone. Okay? Those pieces of sandstone all look like regular sandstone. None of them are ever white encrusted until you find your fire rocks. Your fire rocks are always white encrusted. And they only had fire pits in a house made of sandstone, because if you have it outside your fire pit with sandstone rock around it, and you got that rock really hot and it goes to rain, or somebody even spills their water on it, well, that sandstone explodes. It's going to explode. Dak Zilla Hunts is on a site in Missouri where he's found a wide variety of points. Okay, a good spring, a good occupation site that was good for the Dalton people, good for the archaic people. It was good for all of them. A lot of your best sites are all off of some kind of waterway. That's where that conception of they didn't use boats back then is just ridiculous. That's why they lived everywhere they could, because they had those boats, those dugout canoes to travel by. And a good site is, you get certain ones where, I mean, there's billions of multi-component sites, what they call them, multicultural sites. They have everything from bird points all the way to Daltons, and sometimes the Clovis gets found there as well, or multiples. So what these archaic people were doing when they became regional, and you know, the woodland cultures followed them as well, for the most part. So they're living at one site for so long, and they're needing to send somebody to the next site where those homes have already been standing for as long as since the first people that ever built them there, and then left that site. And each time a group comes back to that site, well, they just recondition those. You know, put some new clay and vegetation on the exterior, make sure everything, you know, is you know, sustainable for their life. You know, a good shelter. I'm not gonna ever not suggest that they didn't always use a certain amount of hides to make temporary shelters with. I don't care what you want to call them. You can call them a teepee. Teepee's more an historical classification name for a house. Okay? Of course, it would have been something similar. That's just something they handed down. But when you're going to be trying sustaining your place in a certain area long enough, it's more practical to have a house that's going to withstand a long time. So when you return to it, it's still there. So you have them staying at certain sites only so long. Well, it's practical human nature. It's not only that, it only makes common sense that you want to do that in a circle, sometime. You know, I'm not saying it's not going to be amoeba shaped and they've done some zigzag due to location. But they're only going to stay at a site for so long. And you're going to get one group in whatever area, I don't care where they were, Alabama, Tennessee, Missouri, out west. They're only going to stay there. That firewood's moved up. They're going to move to the next site. They're going to stay there that same, you know, until that firewood's used up. And that's where, like, each time before they go to leave, they're taking their axes. They're maybe making all the kids that are old enough, 12, 13, to already be laborers into the group, into the family, and dig up around those roots. You take any tree and you expose its roots, and you scar those roots up really bad. So they knew they were going to be coming back to each one of those sites in so many years. So when you scar all those trees, all those roots up on those trees, you know, you're not like destroying your axe. Even if you have to sharpen it up, you know, once every so often, it's still not, you know, sustainable damage to break it where you can't even sharpen it up. Now, of course, that happened to a lot of them. There's been a lot of broken axes found, but I think there's been more whole axes found than actual broken axes. That would be an interesting number to know. How many broken axes have been known to have been found in history completely versus all the whole ones? I saw a lot more whole ones than I've ever saw broken ones. They loved confluences, where a creek and a river or two creeks come together and there's a spring in that area. Didn't matter if it was on this side of the confluence or the other side of the confluence. They're going to live where those springs are at. That is life sustainable. It's also another thing. Those people were the ultimate hunters, the ultimate fishermen. You can watch Ryan Gill hunt primitive, and then there's another guy on YouTube as well that does a lot of hunting primitive stuff. Those guys, if they can be modern men nowadays and stand in the front of a boat and addle fish, you can darn sure bet prehistoric people were doing that long before. And that's, you know, see, there's another part of the clue. You take Inuit people, Alaskans. You know, those people just didn't start out whaling with harpoons. They've been doing that long before they left the Asian continent. They had to do that by boat. There's another, you know, spearing fish or using a atlatl to put a spear into a fish, and then whether they had it, you know, like a harpoon, or it has a really long rope to it, or some kind of fiber, you know, made into, basically, yeah, a rope. I mean, there's other things you can call it. Good night, Mary Ellen. I see me doing a lot of ham. So, you know, that misconception of where they never had boats here, you know, that's just, they always had boats. But they're always going to only stay at a site for so long, till that firewood's used up. Then it's time to move, like I said, whatever it was, in whoever's region, it's all different. In Missouri, you can go about a mile, 2 miles, some places it might be 3 miles, but there's a spring, one right after the other. Most all locations of majorities of springs all run into some kind of waterway, some kind of creek. I don't care if it's a 5-foot ditch creek or a 100-yard wide creek that people want to call a river, but it's just still a creek. Or any river. So they always have their homes there where they're going to come back and recondition them. They're always traveling from one occupation site with a spring to another occupation site with a spring, the next one. They're always making sure that they are killing the oldest tree out there and that around that certain occupation site they're at the time. So whether they're going to 10 different sites in a big circle back to that same site, whether it takes them 5 years, 10 years, those are always the questions that are always going to be left assumable, because you just can't figure that part out. I mean, I mathematically do things like sometimes on my posts on Facebook where it was well, yeah, Neil Cabelli's comment right there, you know, he says swamps have more camps than creeks and rivers my way. Swamps have diverse range of food. Well, those swamps are there because there's spring water there. And that's another thing. Environmental indifferences. Environmental indifferences cause prehistoric people, even the same group, living in the same region, being archaic people, to be able to change what they do over at this occupation site to say they're over here 20 miles away at another occupation site, or even the same, you know, timeline, same group of people living in the same era, are going to have some things a little bit different just because something changed in their terrain. It's always something due to the terrain and the direct environment they're living in. So environmental differences, not just like from region to region, like say from here down to the southeast part of the United States, you know, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. You know, there was environmental indifferences there compared to here that definitely gave them all different types of variables in there. From what they hunted a lot of the times, to their type of housing, to what they used as for vegetation, for whether it was a type of foraging food, whether it was for some type of fiber, for weaving, for a number of different things. What time are you rolling here at? Can anybody give me a time as to how long it says we've been recording? I forgot the time when I started it. It's 7:36. So, yeah. You have these people, the archaic people, they're living regional, even though, like, example, the Etley culture, Sedalia culture lived all throughout Missouri. Every corner you can think of, there's basically an Etley found. You get down south, it's not as many Etleys, it's more Smith type points. Same exact culture. They would try to tell you that it's different culture, but it's really not. And, that culture there, their occupation existence was supposed to lasted for 2,000 years. From the end of the mid-archaic stages to the end of the late archaic stages. So from around 5,000, 4,000 years to 3,000 years, or 6,000 to 4,000, 5,000, to 3,000 years, and then in came the woodland culture. Some of their carbon dating is probably okay, and I'm never going to say that it's perfect. If they ever say it's perfect, they're probably lying. But it does give a relativity to their timeline. So when you take a culture anywhere, whether they lasted for 1,000 years or 2,000 years, and they're never living directly on the same site the whole time. They're always moving to different sites. They may even get where they live in an area where the terrain even changes on them. So what they did over here, they're going to have something different that they're going to do in that different terrain, because there's an environmental indifference that causes them to always need to be extremely adaptable. Modern humans are not adaptable anymore, because we think we can be permanently stationary and beat her at her game. No, that's not how it's going to work. That was their biggest success, is always being extremely adaptable. You have to change to suit everything else in the environment, not try to get the environment to change and suit you. That's just not how it works. It's like all the survivalists, all the different types I've paid attention to. I'm not talking about the doomsday prepper people on History Channel or whatever. I'm talking about guys like Matt Graham. And, well, there's a ton of other guys out there. I mean, even guys before social media came along, and before they had, Dual Survivalist show with Cody, and the guy who's always barefoot, and one of the Marines that's always with him in the different ones. Even before that show, there was guys writing books on being a wilderness survival. There's a ton of stuff you can always learn from them. And it's just like I learned from somebody who's teaching a different subject, okay? And they said, if you want to learn anything really good, the best thing you can do is search out everybody who has the best credibilities in their profession, or whatever their niche is, whatever their IRE, whatever it is that they do. You seek out all of those best people, and you learn as much information as you can from them, and then you collaborate all that together. If you're intelligent enough, most of that collaboration is always going to bring practicalities forth that will always dictate what was most always probable to happen. It's just like through all of prehistoric lithic people, all Paleolithic people, something I've never read in a book, they would have always taught, just like everything else they were teaching about life, about preventive measurements. So you don't end up with a big cut. You don't end up getting sick. So you don't end up getting hurt. The best thing to always do was always have a precaution on everything you do. You know, I'm not saying that they didn't do stuff that was probably daring, because whether it was the adrenaline excitement or their life depended on it, or getting their food source harvested that day depended on it. But for the most part, they would have always taught all the way. I mean, for hundreds of thousands of years, you have to have precautionary measurements in your life to make sure you don't get hurt. These people did not have soap that we know of. You know, I'm sure they had something that kind of helped clean them up. And of course, they probably had to get in a bath once in a while too. They probably didn't even like their own smell after a certain amount of time. You can only carry so much dirt on you, and eventually you got to wash it off. And as far as we know, they could have had something that they knew how to make some type of soap out of. You know, not saying it's a soap like we have nowadays, however it's made, but it's possible they could have had something. But even if they didn't have antibacterial soap. They didn't have toilet paper. You don't want a bunch of cuts on your hands from napping. On either hand, any hand, ever. Of course, I'm sure if it happened, they wrapped it up. But it's not something they would have wanted. That's not a good combination. That gives staph infection. You know, like, however long people have been here, every time they made a major mistake, somebody got sick and died. This happened. That was always taught not to do that. No, you don't do that. You're going to get sick, you're going to die. So I hope some of that's, you know, kind of making headway there, you know. Next video, I'll make sure I have my punch list down. And this is kind of like just a test, really, because I didn't know how good my service was going to work. But I'm going to be able to at least do them once a month, like around the second or the third. You know, whenever my satellite internet megabytes renew. Satellite internet's terrible. It's a joke compared to cable. I absolutely hate it. I get screwed. Anybody with satellite internet gets screwed for the amount you gotta pay. It's a ridiculous monopoly. You know, it's like I was talking about how they're gonna send somebody to another site to prepare it before they get there by at least burning out the vegetation. Okay, and this book here, this is mostly a lithic book, but it does have a lot of site information in it. But some of the site information that's in this book is I've read in other books, okay? Here's an example. And there's been many mainstream excavated sites by them so-called professionals where they record everything, okay? Example, the Big Eddy site. It had like 24 artifacts, a couple whole points, mostly the rest were all broken, okay? None of those late archaic artifacts showed any signs of heat treatment whatsoever. Okay, in that square area they excavated, they found 363 flakes. Okay, all stickered and numbered. 363 flakes. 8% of those flakes, so you're talking like 23, 24 flakes, showed signs of heat treatment. But there's still a lot of that site and any site that they've ever dug still left there to be excavated. So out of 363, they had 23 or 24 that were heat treated. But they will tell you. It says it in this book. It says it in all those other books. They don't know if that's because those chips were laying next to or in a fire pit, which should be easily to be known if they knew what fire rock was. Okay? Which in an outside pit and outside of their Hogan-style home, they didn't need any kind of rock in it. They just dug a certain hole, and that was basically it. They never used rock on an outside fire pit. So, back to where all these archaeologists like excavate a site, and they say there's 363 flakes, and we had 23 of them that showed signs of heat treatment, but we don't know if it was from them being in a fire, or it could have been a natural event like a lightning fire. Lightning struck the ground and lit the ground or burnt a tree and caught the area on fire. Okay? The reason they could never explain that is because they never explained that they only stayed at an occupation site for so long and then they moved to the next one. We still do the same thing when any human anywhere is going to move where there is not a structure already built. They go in and they prepare that home site. Those prehistoric people did the same thing. They pre-prepared their home sites, especially ones they already know they're going to go live at again. So when you take a culture like the Atlee culture, and they lived for 2,000 years of existence, and they're using 10 different camps, this one, like they're surrounding a whole quarter of a county, we could consider it nowadays, and they're staying at 10 different camps for so long. Before they move to the next one, they're sending someone there to go burn all the vegetation off on that site. Okay, so if that Atlee culture lived 2,000 years and they used the same site, let's just say every 6 months. They only used a site for 6 months. They had 10 different sites. Well, each one of those sites through that entire 2,000 years was used 400 different times. 400 different times they lived there. That means every time before they went to live there again, they sent someone to burn it off 400 different times. So, when you have all those fires happening, burning all that vegetation over and over and over and over again, it's going to, all of those flakes that have always been directly underneath the surface, directly underneath the vegetation, getting heated again and again and again and again and again and again to gain heat altercation and slightly change their color. Okay? The DH site is a great example. I really wish I had pictures of just in big conjunctions to show it, where I can account for every pink artifact that I know that's came off of my side of the site and the adjoining property. Those people, I knew everything they dug. I knew all the pink artifacts they found. Okay, all of those hard pink artifacts could fill like maybe one great big case. We're talking 50 artifacts, adds, Sedalias, Atlees, Smetley type points that actually had pink to them naturally from that type of rock. Whereas after digging on there and excavating and I have a bucket of all these pink flakes where you never find a pink artifact, and there's masses and masses, amounts of pink flakes, not versus the overall of all the flakes. I mean, there's enough flakes on that site, just like there is any site that's been well excavated, to fill dump trucks. You're not going to pick them all up and stick numbers and do a gazillion flakes on there. It's ridiculous, really. But, so there's always, all the other material is always in a lot larger masses amounts versus those pink flakes. That is very practical. Practicality will dictate for several different reasons why they went and burned that ground off before they went to live there for 2 months. You're not going to go camping and go set your tent up in a 4-foot tall field of grass, are you? Absolutely not. You're going to. You want something where the park guy's been there and mowed it. They didn't have that pleasure. They sent someone there to burn it off. It gets some weathering on it. The wind, the rain, it gets rid of all the nasty black stuff, so when they show up, all their stuff, their feet, shoes, clothes, whatever they have, ain't going to be full of all this nasty black ash. That's also another clue as to why those flakes end up with a little bit of heat altercation versus the massive amounts that weren't heat altercated. Now you got to remember, environmental differences made everything different from here to Ohio, Kentucky. But you have practicalities. You have certain sustainable things of life that were the same no matter where they lived at. They are never going to stay at one site too long. I mean, even historical Native Americans really didn't do that. They were regional. They stayed at this spring in this area, and they knew winter was coming. So they have a winter camp. You know, they knew spring was coming. They go to their spring camp. They know midsummer's coming. They go to their summer camp. All of this is actually recorded. That's just a human attribute of living that type of life. It wasn't like it was, you know, in Europe where, you know, they already had Greece erected, you know, Egypt erected, you know, where people are all staying in one area. Later outdoor use. Hello, Commissioner Tom. You guys found a banner stone, huh? That's awesome. You know, see, there's another misconception about banner stones. A banner stone versus a tie-on atlatl weight is a huge difference. Most tie-on atlatl weights, whether they're used by guys modernly atlatl hunting nowadays versus the ones that are believed to be tie-on atlatl weights from prehistoric times, they're all small. They're all very, very small. You really don't need one. Too many people that have experimented for years with atlatl hunting, you know, whether they were doing it as a target sport or target competition versus the people now that are out doing it, been doing it for a long time. Matt Graham has done it out in the Utah desert for a very long time. Any of those guys will tell you for long distance hunting, you know, if you have to chuck that spear at your atlatl 50 yards or 100 yards, you don't want no weight to it. You want no weight to it. If you're hunting something in close range, like say rabbits, raccoons, possibly even fish, that little bit of weight to that atlatl kind of changes its velocity some as to without. That's why you don't want it with needing to try and spear something at 50 or 100 yards away. It takes away from that velocity. When it's close up range, you want that spear a little bit slower versus as fast as it'll go. And that's due to all those guys that share that information. Okay? So a banner stone. If banner stones were true atlatl weights, you would not only find just one here, one there per site. You know, there's some sites that never even have a banner stone. There's some sites that might kick out 5 banner stones. Okay? those were always some type of status symbol. It definitely went on something because of the holes drilled in them, which are always cane drilled. They're never conical drilled with a flint knap drill. Those are what's done by Gourds most of the time, because you can tell they're conical drilled because at least the drill mark's getting smaller and smaller and smaller as that tip's getting. Which goes, that banner stone and status symbol, that falls along with another misconception that's been given for years. A lot of people take that word ceremony way out of context. You know, for them, that was just kind of part of life. And prehistoric people were always spiritual. They were always spiritual in some type of sense, in some type of way. When you're a spiritual person, you know, and you have your group of people, whatever, you're always trying to teach that younger generation, you know, different things about that. And also, you know, adults, any time in lifetime, you have to have something that brings, you know, pleasant thoughts. You know, some type of, you could call it entertainment, okay? Now, some of this isn't, it's bits and pieces that I've learned from everybody that's wrote stuff down in books, everybody that's shared stuff on social media, from every avenue I can learn from. And that includes historical Native Americans. I read about historical Native Americans for, probably 20 years before I ever even thought about an arrowhead. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. What do they still do to this day? Now, I'm not even talking a powwow. I'm talking about their own little tribes and villages. You know, they have big dinners where they kind of like with the dinner, they have a little bit of entertainment ceremony. You have whoever it is, the shaman, he has something that tribe, that culture, he has one of everything that they use all the time as a tool of usage, a tool of survival. But his only gets used to come out and tell stories. It's just like those Native American elders nowadays that tell stories that they say, this story's been being told for 10,000 years. You know, that we came here on boats. Those are things that like the mainstream archaeologists just totally dismiss. So that's why, like, there's always a stat, you know, not every site has them. And that's because, you know, not just a gorget or a banner stone, something that's a status symbol. It's because that group, that clan, that wherever they left that banner stone at that one time, they were living on multiple occupation sites all the time. They only stayed at one for so long, and whether they moved to 10 or they moved to 30, for their entire existence as a culture. And then a lot of those cultures, like say the late archaic culture, as those Etli people were becoming the woodland culture, and they were starting to transition their knife types, or, you know, the environment changed. Something in the environment, because it got a little bit warmer, caused something different to happen. Like once upon a time, there was no river cane in Missouri. There was no river cane anywhere up a certain point on that line, you know, coming up from the south, because it wasn't sustainable temperatures for it to thrive and continue to just move. So, you know, it's like a lot of shelters that have been dug around us, conch shell has been found. The only place conch shell comes from is the Gulf Coast. So there was people from the Gulf Coast bringing conch shell up here. there was probably someone here always traveling down south. You know, they would have always sent somebody out to explore and then try and come back and find their group, whether it took them 10 years or 20 years, you know, or 5 years. Those timeline, you know, those short timeline things, those are always going to be left up to assumption, because it always would dictate on the size of each group as to how long they stayed at an occupation site. So that banner stone or that gorget is only going to be left at, it's not going to be left at every one of those sites. That don't mean that they're not going to make another one, you know, and then it's going to get left somewhere else too. If they were true Atlatl weights and needed to be to Atlatl hunt, banner stones would be laying at every site, probably just as much as the whole knives are. If you could find a whole knives in one field for your 20 years of walking it, or dig a site that's as big as a football field and it's got, that man ought to have 100 banner stones in it. That's not how it happens. So that's where you have to take other aspects of life that are practical and add them into the collaboration with everything else. Sorry, I ain't been looking down at the comments. I've been trying to keep myself a little bit on track here. Hello, Bob Jones, David Gist, Kevin Brown. Hey, Kevin, I haven't heard from you for a long time. Jake Matthews. Like Jake Matthews says, there are so many missing links in the chain of the mainstream archaeology. All you have to do is look at Egypt as an example to know that mainstream archaeology is in denial of the truth. Yeah, and like on Facebook, there's so many artifact groups, it's ridiculous. But you get some that guys are very good in their element because they have put their time and study into it. Dennis Kearns runs a group, it's called Cold Hard Truth. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to agree with everything Dennis says, but Dennis is very good at what he does. He's put a lot of time into it, and he proves through not just technology and morphology of how points are, how they're made, how they differ from each other, but a lot of other different factors. That's where I said before, all those archaeologists, they're not as good as they claim to be. And actually, they become a very entitled profession. They really believe they're entitled. And that's just wrong. I mean, I guess in a sense, but they do. You know? And a brain surgeon's probably better than a kidney surgeon, you know, or a doctor who works on the gastrial system, you know. Everybody has their little different niche. That's where certain people, where they're really good at what they do, and it can only be a few different things, but if you can learn from that person and those aspects, and also always look to learn from somebody else in those other aspects, and then you're taking that and you put it into a collaboration together, there is so much to learn. And one clue is going to lead to another clue. I'm never saying that I know it all. I'm never saying I'm right. That's not the thing. The only way I know to put it is, like I said in the beginning of the video, most of the things I'm always going to discuss is information that I've definitely learned from somebody else, and I have collaborated it with several different other aspects. It's like I pay attention to a lot of these archaeologists that are in Facebook groups. A lot of them don't have a hunter mindset, okay? To understand hunting situations really well, you have to have a good skilled hunter mindset. That doesn't mean when I was 14 years old and I was still a good hunter that I had a really good hunter's mindset. No, it's just like anything anybody takes in life. It takes years of learning and it takes years of effort. And it all falls into that continuous life, a circle. To be the best human you want to be, you can never stop growing. You can never stop learning. There's so many people in this world, and it's terrible nowadays. They let themselves get into a stalemate of life. A stalemate. That's it. There's too much resistance. I'm going to stay right here because this is my little life and I'm comfortable in it. If I don't go out of my element, I have no resistance that I have to go up against to try and conquer. And are we going here or what? Hey, Dirty Water Jonesy. Are we still running live here? Can somebody let me know that? So, you know, it's a great thanks to all of these type of archaeology books, all the survivalist books I've read, all the hunting I've read for years. I mean, I used to be a big time hunter until I had my accident. And even after that, I still read things on hunting. It's just because knowledge gained is knowledge used, you know. You can't use something and learn to be better unless you gain some knowledge from somebody else. Where a lot of those people skip out, they're not collaborating every little aspect of life together. You know, it's like I was talking about that site preparedness, site preparation before they show up to it. They did the same thing with overhang and cave shelters. Anyone that's ever dug a lot in a cave or an overhang, inside of it, in every layer spread throughout the whole place, there is little tiny pieces of charcoal. Okay? It's not a fire pit. What happens is it's the same reason why those shelters fill up with dirt, a lot of them, and just stacking layers of each occupation that ever lived there. Multiple layers. You know, you may have a 2000 woodland period like this and it exists in 12 inches because those people stayed there every so often. Those shelters would have been just like a Hogan home. They had a wall built out of timber, covered with mud and vegetation on the outside. When the people that left to go to the next site to go live at for however long, whether they circled back in or some other group circled back in, well, all that old bedding material is still in that shelter. Okay? Again, these people, we have no idea if they had a use of any kind of soap except just getting as clean as they could in the creek, river, lake, whatever, in some kind of water. So they always had some kind of lice, even if it was just a little bit, you know. And then you not only have that dry vegetative material laying in there on the ground with the lice from the last people and even the lice you're packing in, but all the living in there. So it's very practical to spread that bedding material out on the floor and light it afire. Burn it off. Burn it off. Another thing that collaborates with that is no matter what type of terrain of the shelter is outside of a shelter, it can be flat, it can have a 90-degree slope. That terrain has more artifacts on the outside of that shelter. That's what's inside of it. Well, how did they do that with that 90-degree slope? It's the same reason why the dirt is inside the shelter, covering up all those layers. You burn that floor off of the old material, that first group of people that ever lived there that wanted to utilize the outside to nap in, sit out there and eat, cook food, whatever, they would have cut that terrain and try and make nice projectiles. It's uncomfortable. They're going to cut terraces. At that same time, they're able to take that dirt and cover their floor. They got a brand new floor. Stay there till that firewood and that area is all gathered up and used within a walking distance, where the last guy that walked the farthest said, I'm not going out for any more firewood again. That's ridiculous, having to go almost 3/4 of a mile to pack wood back. Let's go to the next site where we were at 10 years ago, and we scarred 4 different trees and their roots, where when we show up, we know they're going to be dead season trees. We can cut them down with our axe. We can cut them down to the smallest of pieces we want. They weren't people that needed a fire to burn all day, unless it's to stay cold, okay? So during good weather, every day, they're going to start a new fire. They're not just going to burn wood because they can't start another fire. They could have started a fire with 2 sticks in a matter of a minute. In a matter of a minute. And you can understand that by if you watch all these guys on YouTube that show how they can do it now. Well, you darn well bet prehistoric people they were the expert at everything. They had been doing this for, I don't care if you want to believe they lived here for 2.5 million years or only 100,000 years. Whoever learned how to first do that, that was taught constantly. And it became perfected. That was an everyday life thing for them. That's another thing that falls into that theory of where outside sites and going to burning that vegetation off. It, over times, of every time they came to live there, burning that off, some of those manufactured flakes saw heat altercation that over so many times changed them and changed that color. It changed their construct, and you look under it, they do like a water test where they blow pieces of it off and then examine that under a microscope. Hello, Michael. How many people we got watching? 37. Well, I want to say I appreciate all you people coming to watch and listen to me babble on. I should have had the next one. I will have my punch list down. And like I said, it's not that I'm wanting to say anybody's bad and I'm better, because that's not the case. I'm always my worst critic. But I've learned to use that in a positive attribute type of way. I've learned to make it a positive characteristic. Always being your worst critic causes you to always want to be better. And you humbly know that to learn to be better, you always have to be learning something from somebody else who has already done it. They're willing to share that information of how they conquered through, discovered, put 2 and 2 together to be better. Prehistoric people were the same way. Where modern society has been let us take that strong survival mode out of us. That's where I said, that's where I love that show Alone. That show alone, if you watch every season, it will teach you more about prehistoric people than you ever thought of. Because these people that are getting on that show call themselves survivalists. Ha! They are not survivalists. Those people drop off like flies in a manner, probably because they're having some type of anxiety that's causing them to be slightly distracted. And that's just all, I think, brought on by all the modern constructs of society. So, who's sick? I see somebody saying about somebody's glad somebody's doing better. So there's a lot of things that they've skipped out in all those books because they just have that mindset out of that book. That's it. You know, one type of mindset, or maybe they do understand foraging, but they've never been a hunter, or they haven't studied to be a survivalist their whole life. And that's a natural survivalist. I'm not talking about a doomsday prepper or whatever. That was something in everyday life, in prehistoric life. So they were, and it was, you know, everything was always extremely important to teach. Life was a school. You know, everyday life was a school. But there's a lot of things that anybody that does a lot of studying in their area, especially anybody that does a lot of excavating. I don't care what anybody says. If you're digging for arrowheads and you're not paying attention to every detail and trying to learn something, so later on you can add to the circle, add to that circle of life and knowledge and pass it on, then yeah, you're just digging for a shiny arrowhead. You're just digging for a G10 first. Always. You know, just because life circumstances change things around, and yeah, I don't have near the arrowheads I've found in the years. I've given a ton away. I've sold a ton because life circumstances have just put me in those situations. You know, I know people that have buckets at arrowheads, and it's just because they're missing a tip or base or whatever, they would never give those arrowheads away to anybody. They don't even want people seeing them, let alone their good ones. The thing is to constantly learn. You know, it's like I learned something from somebody that doesn't even have to do anything with prehistoric things. And a lot of people, they hit that stalemate of life. And they stay stuck in that stalemate of life, whatever type of characteristic, attribute, situation, circumstance it may be, because they're not doing the two things that will truly make a person happy, no matter if you have very little money or you got enough money to buy whatever you want. The number one thing is always continually growing as the person you are. Growing to be better. Always wanting to be better. It's that continuous growth. That's just one of them. The other one is giving. I don't care if you're giving to one person, you're only giving to two people, you're only in the circle of life. Continually growing into the circle of life is what brings continuous happiness. I'm not saying that person's not going to have like a little bad day. Everybody has bad days. It's that length of time span. Whether you have something you want to make yourself better at and it takes you a whole year. It takes you 5, 10 years. I don't care. That's where society, humanity, like really starts downgrading. And we've become weaker compared to what we were as prehistoric people. Because too many people get in that stalemate of life, they're happy where they're at, they don't need to learn anymore. You know, or for some reason, they don't never consider that concept of, you know, continually giving something. You know, whether it, however many people it is too. You always have to give something. Everybody's always able to give something. So many people have different talents. You know, lots of people have a lot of physical abilities where they can go help their neighbor out, you know, or go help an elderly person out. continually giving in some type of manner. That's always been prehistoric life. That's always been what the Paleolithic people did. Always adding into that circle of life. Hello, Kendra, Craig, Kyle Priest, Rob Blumberg. Hope I said that right. Blumberg. So, I hate to make this any longer. Again, I really appreciate everybody that came, hung out. I'm going to save this, even though I think I really kind of flubbergusted in the beginning of it. It's been a while since I've done a live it upright vertically, and that kind of flabbergasted me, and not having my punch list where I stay a little bit more on track. But that's the thing about Prehistoric Live too, and you have so much that you learn. There's so much to talk about, and you kind of do have to jump back and forth, because one thing collaborates with another thing, and you have to have all those collaborations in life put together. It's like next time, the beginning of next month, November, that's when I'm going to do the next one. One of the big things we're going to talk about is primal instincts of animals and cognitive thinking of prehistoric people, cognitive thinking of people today. They're still the same. Animals, just about any kind of species, creature in the animal kingdom, is due to the density growing population of humans and us causing their areas to be smaller and more invaded by us. That's the only thing that changes them. They still live the same pattern of lives. The only thing that changes a wild ranging buffalo to an easy buffalo to walk up on to kill is because one lived in a large confinement for its whole life. The others did not. We'll leave it at that. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming. Hope everybody had a good weekend. Hope everybody has a great week. Hope everybody has a great month, a good Halloween. And I'll have a hunting video up here soon. Maybe this week. I need to look at all my video clips. I think I finally have one I can put something together with enough. Prehistoric Life Disquisition number 2. We will see you next time. And later. Thank you for coming. Wow, that ran an hour and 44 minutes. That's awesome. I figure out how to stop it. Thanks, Tom. Later, Clarence. Later, Moroccan.